Hello and welcome to the next tutorial of the magic spells for SneakyRP. In this particular tutorial we're going to talk about beam spells. And when I say beam spell, you shouldn't necessarily think about a scorching ray that's sweeping across the land. A beam spell is more like a ray cast spell. It casts an invisible line between, well, usually my eyes and my mouse pointer. And I can have it cast spells at various locations. For example, the first time it hits the ground, or maybe every so many blocks, or maybe every so many blocks it hits the ground. So that's the beam spell. It's really like a ray cast spell would be a more appropriate name for it. Let's just quickly open that thing up. Make a quick new file. Document. Spells tutorial BeamSpell. Yes, I do. Now, as a tradition, we're going to start this off, or as it's starting to become a tradition, we're going to start this off with find item. BeamSpell item. What are we going to do here? We're going to make a spell that creates a nice little graphical circle effect at a distance. Wand of... This is called the Wand of the Circle. Right click. Summon a healing circle. So, let's rename this circle. Circle spell. So we're of course going to start off with a beam spell. Back to our trusted wiki. Instant.BeamSpell. Will be called circle-beam. Effect. We're going to change a little tidbit from our normal dummy spells. We're going to make this a targeted dummy spell. CircleEffect. Add target. And it's not an entity because we want it to be ground targeted. Cool. Effect. Right click. Cast. Item. Item. Now, this should already do something, though not entirely what I want it to do, but that's good. We don't want it to do what we want it to do yet, because we're not done. Let's see, magic item, circle, item, R1 of the circle. See what happens. Aha, nothing. Very interesting. Very interesting. Must have made a mistake somewhere. DummySpell. Target. Ah, right. I get it. We put it in spell. Should have put it in spell on hit ground, because we're not targeting enemies here. In fact, I am curious, would it work if I cast as an entity? Yes. There's a green thing. Okay. So yeah, it's not working because we made it entity targeting instead of ground targeting. Always take a look at those configs. First thing you should be looking at is the configs on the wiki. Take a look at those. I want this to be a little bit nicer. Radius 5. Rotation false. Of course, all of these options can just be found in the effectlib's documentation, which we've gone over in the first series. Cast reload. There we go. Nice little circle effect. I'm going to offset this, make it slightly higher. But that's a nice little circle effect. Now you might notice that it's not landing exactly where I would want it to land ideally. The reason it's not landing exactly where we want it to land is because the beam spell we made has a very big collision by default. So we're just going to look into the configs of the beam spell and adjust those a little bit. First of all, the relative offset is 0.5, whereas my eyes are higher up, so we're going to make it relative offset. So this is the offset of where the spell starts in relation to my feet. So that's the first thing. We're going to try to make it start closer to our eyes. Hit radius, there's the problem. Hit radius is 2. It hits with any solid block within a radius of 2, and that's why it keeps landing on weird spots. 0.01. Max distance. We don't want to max distance. I want this to be infinite. Strive 0 works. It should. Beam spells require quite a bit of tuning, specifically because of this hit radius 2. It's just far too much for a ground target spell. If it's entity targeted, then 2 is nice and forgiving. But for ground targeting spell, 2 is going to clip on everything, which we don't want. We don't want gravity. That's fine, because we don't have an effect. And we do want this to stop when it hits the ground. Now this should already land it closer to the center of our mouse. Oh, instead we somehow broke it. That's interesting. That's why we experiment. That's why it's also generally wise to only do one of these at a time. Find out. Oh, is it just the max distance 0? Is that it? That must be it. 999. There, and that's already much closer to the center of our mouse there. Here we go, and that's a way that we can use beam spells. So yeah, beam spells can be used to target basically any point in space. As I've already told you in the last tutorial, you can also use a targeted multi-spell to target a block. If I were to, let's see, if I were to cast at this point with a beam spell, then it would use that actual point as origin, which you can sort of see in the altitude that it's spawning at. However, if I were to use a targeted multi-spell, then it would use the bottom left corner of that block. So if you are actually targeting a block, you can definitely use a targeted multi-spell for it instead of a beam spell. They are very similar in their use if you only put one spell into the target's multi-spell. Just keep in mind that if you use a targeted multi-spell, it's going to put your spell in the bottom left corner of the block, whereas a beam spell is actually going to change depending on where you cast it. See? I was targeting the same space, but you can distinctly see that the circle ended up in different locations. Whereas if I used a targeted multi-spell, then casting it here or here wouldn't matter. It would both end them up at the bottom left corner here. So that's a major difference that you need to account for. Other than that, you can definitely use targeted multi-spells instead of beam spells. It kind of depends on what you want to happen. So that's the end of the beam spell tutorial. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you around.